Resilience Initiative. All right. Welcome to our third session of the role of the Executive Director of Fundraising. And thank you to our partners at the Resilience Initiative. We have been partnering with them since 2020. So it has been a minute. And just want to introduce ourselves, or I don't know, is there anyone who is on this call who was not on our other two calls? All of these names look very familiar, so please raise your hand if we have not virtually met before. I'm not seeing any hands, so I'm going to skip the boring stuff and get into what we're doing today. So at our last session, oh, Kim, you weren't on the second one, but you were on the first. Awesome. So when we had our last conversation, we got through most of the grow and align your forces for battle. But we didn't really get into the raise the money to pay for it. So, and I have a brand new puppy sitting in my office. So my beloved husband will be coming to take her out momentarily. So if you hear the whining in the background, that is KU. So we got through most of grow and align your forces. And we hadn't really touched the raise the money to pay for it. So that's what we wanted to talk about today. But certainly also wanted to have ample space for open discussion and any questions that had come up for you all over the last few sessions, or as we navigate life as EDs, especially for those of us who are more on the progressive side of the nonprofit sector, and what our life has looked like since the presidential memo last Friday. Okay. Any questions or comments before we dive in? All right. So where we stopped our question, let me Kimber or Tiffany's having trouble getting on here, so let me just let her direction. Apologize for that. So where we left off with the grow and align your forces, and this is really about for us, how do we staff fundraising? So one of the things that causes friction in terms of how do we staff fundraising, how do we pay to staff fundraising, is really this concept of like programs versus admin and fundraising. And this is where the nonprofit industrial complex sets us up for this eternal fight between programs and admin fundraising. It's literally on our 990 forms like that. We know we're all expected to have at least 75% of our costs be programs. But if you actually do that, you are significantly under-resourcing what we call core mission support, which would be like finance, HR, governance, marketing, and fundraising. And then those shared programs are things like marketing, communicating out about your mission, and anything that is shared by all of your programs. So one of the ways to grow and align your forces properly is to really think about what it means to do this in a different way. So I'd love a show of hands. Welcome, Tiffany. I am glad that your tech issues are okay.
Yes, thank you.
Would love to just show of hands or in the chat, how many of you are still doing sort of 75% program, 25% overhead, and calling it a day in terms of how you look at how you budget for fundraising? Kim, are you doing it that way? Or is that a question?
I'm doing it that way.
Gotcha. Nirali, also doing it that way. So that's still very much the predominant model. It's what's expected of us. And I mean your overall budget, not your own time. If your own time looks like this,
budget.
Yeah, overall budget. So when you look at any of the like what foundations expect of us, things like that. It is that traditional 75-25 split for typical C3s. So what we recommend, and this is not our model, this is from our friends at Propel Nonprofits. This is actually how we do our budgeting at Progressive Multiplier. It's how we train to do budgeting. And that is to look at things in these four categories of program specific, shared program, and then core mission support, fundraising, and finance, HR, and governance. Um, and then when we go to get funding or investment in any of our programs, they have to actually pay for the entire slice of the pie. So this is what we call like whole program or all in or true cost fundraising there or true cost costing. Like there are lots of different labels for it. But if you haven't gone through this exercise, that is definitely a tool that we can provide you. Um, because it where I got passionate about this is actually because a funder questioned um, why we spent so much on quote unquote overhead, down to the point where they asked me to see by actual like statement of activities what I had in my overhead budget. Um, and I was so offended by this um, because we've made the commitment to live aligned with our values, like pay a thriving wage and invest in professional development and all of those things that increase your overhead. But so Tiffany runs our program. Her professional development is a shared program cost. It is not an overhead cost. Tiffany getting better at doing her job benefits our program. So it is a program cost. The only things that are true, like finance, HR, board costs are, things like our legal counsel, things like our accounting. Um, so and then based on the size of our program, so we have basically four programs that we run. Um, and in proportionality, then they are responsible for the all-in cost of everything behind it. So this really changed the way we budgeted, the way we fundraise, and it gave us enough bandwidth to actually say, here's the staff that we need to support this overall work. Um, so does anybody have any questions? If you've done this and you're already doing this, how has it worked? Or if you haven't and you're like, whoa, how do I do this? Let's talk about it.
Bethany,
Yeah, go ahead, Amy.
hi. These sessions have been so useful, by the way, so I just want to thank you again.
Oh, thank you. That makes me happy.
Um, but I think we are probably moving in the direction of the the right
Hmm.
um on this chart. Um, but I want to go back to your issue of like funders thinking that certain things are overhead, et cetera, and like
Yes.
how were they persuaded against that idea? Um,
I literally did a deck and I said, if you fund us this way, here's what you do to my staff. I was pissed. I mean, I will fully put it out there. And illustrate that if you force us to consider these things as overhead based on your own template versus how we look at our own work and the investment we make in our program via our staff or our shared programmatic work, like talking about our work in marketing. Marketing is not overhead. Marketing is telling the story, writing the case studies, putting them out there, and democratizing the knowledge around, in our case, revenue generation. Um,
And that's our program.
and that's our program. So it was that kind of education. And yes, I was respectful about it and all of those things, but I actually when they asked the questions, I did like a duck and I like lifted lifted the hood and showed them everything that was under it and how it negatively affected. I did you do this, it undercuts us this way.
hmm.
Um, that is another thing that if you need help doing that kind of work, because sometimes that is a hard um, risk to take on yourself, that is something Progressive Multiplier is happy to do on your behalf, whether it is to your board or to your funder. That is something we can help you with, because I will take that bullet all day, every day for any group we work with, because it's core to growing revenue generation as a movement.
Yeah, I mean the area on the right is like how I think about it.
Mm-hmm.
But it does, a lot of times I feel like we're forced into doing it like it's on the left because grant applications are set up a certain way or whatever it is.
Yep.
So,
Don't like, if the application forces you into that model, break it. Like, say, I am submitting this as this is how we, with our auditors, have decided to look at our budget. If you need additional information, etc. Um, I saw a hand, and now, Narali, was that you?
Yeah, it was me. I
I
can
think you're muted.
you can't hear me?
I can barely hear you.
All right. I think it's
That's
great
better.
that you're able to negotiate with your funders on how you would like to budget. I don't know how common that is. I mean, I'm thinking about our major funders and I mean, their whole budgeting reporting template system is so strict that like even when there's a change that they've authorized, you can't fit it into their templates at
Hmm.
you know?
Yeah,
And
we've
so
dealt with the same.
I'm wondering, how, for example, if they say, we will allow for 15% indirect costs or something like that.
Hmm.
Like, how do you take that and think about it in light of an organizational budget? So,
Sure. The other thing that we do where we haven't been able to say use our template, not yours, is um, if they say, what are your staff costs? I look at my all-in staff costs. So I, essentially look at that direct expense, like, I'm going to pick on Tiffany because she's on the phone. But so when Tiffany spends an hour of time with one of the grantees that she directly services, that is her salary and benefits. But when I look at the cost of of Tiffany as an employee, that is a very different picture. It is my time as her supervisor. It is processing her payroll. It is her professional development. It's the computer on her desk. It's all of that. So we completely looked differently at, okay, if you're going to tell me I can only have the direct staff costs, I'll tell you what they cost. And we actually did the calculation. So we still abide by their template, and we can still justify it down to the penny. Um, but we look at it a different way. So I really think we have to be our own advocates and use intermediaries like Progressive Multiplier, New Left Accelerator, any of those groups that are happy to do this kind of work, because that's part of where philanthropic structure actually hurts us very deeply. Um, and I'm happy to share the deck example that we gave. And once we've only had one funder where when I went back and I said, here is what you do to us if you do this, but if you do it this way, we will be whole. I've only ever had one funder in the last 7 years who has said, nope, do it our way. Other than that, our program officers have been very willing to look at things differently. And yes, sometimes that meant getting on the phone with their lawyers and our counsel and things like that. But it's been worth it to be able to not um, to not be hamstrung by the 75% program only. So, because Tiffany's way more expensive than her salary and benefit, and worth every penny.
thank you.
Does that does that help?
Yeah, I mean, I think it helps. I think it's a process.
It is. It is not an overnight thing for sure. Um, and Tiffany, let's definitely put that as a tool. Like, we can take what we've done as our rate card and said, like, here is how like direct program and shared program um, costs that we like put through a staff lens in a funder um, application. Tiffany, go ahead. I see your hand, and then Anna, I will. go to you in the chat.
Nirali, I want to echo what you just finished saying, which is that it's a process. Yes, it's a process, but it's not just a process for the funders. It is a process for you as an organization to get grounded in drilling all the way down to what does a staff hour dedicated to this actually incorporate, and then learn to get comfortable with that being the reality. I think we have, as a movement, been forced into believing the reality of this graph on the left, which is not real. It is fabricated. It does
Fiction.
not reflect the way that we do any of this work. And it does mean that we have to crack the code within ourselves to really live into this model and recognize the truth of the stuff on the right. Because as you know, as any fundraiser knows, you have to believe your case before you can make it to everybody else. And it just takes a perspective shift. And the more comfortable you get with understanding the way the numbers drill all the way down, the easier it will be to make your case. And we're here to help you make that a reality.
Yeah. Because we've leaned into this hard, and it's taken about, I'm going to say 3 years. So we now have like a managing director of programs and a managing director of core mission support. So we literally modeled our organization this way, so our budget rolls up this way to make it much easier to portray our story in that way. So we can actually tell this concentric circle story and weighted by program now. Anna, when you say, how does this look different in fundraising or in budgeting? So this is a budgeting model. So tell me more about your question. But the budgeting model is critical, because if we go and try to fund ourselves 75% program, 25% everything else, you will never scale your fundraising program appropriately. And that is part of the ED job.
I guess I'm just wondering if you could give me an example of like what it looks like for a budget to be 75-25, and then how that looks a little bit different with the example that you have.
Yeah. So when we go 75-25, which is the like age-old industry standard, it means that we are really looking at everything that isn't program as overhead, versus mission critical. So, and when most organizations start, they start with their initial budget built this way. Because they don't have historical data or anything. So this is usually like the starting line. So when you then migrate your budget to be more real, and this is where the strategic decisions kind of come in terms of what kind of fundraising do you want to go after? What are your HR policies going to be? This is where we're getting outside of the lane of fundraising. But you are spending way more than 25%. So we just did our statement of functional expense for our audit, and across both our C3 and C4, we are at 20, what is it? 2971 is our split. And if you look like, and that's rolled up, if you actually look at our RC3 versus RC4, RC3 is more like 68% program. So we can definitely we can show an example. I don't have that in this deck, but for sure I can show you, like, here is how this would look if I squeezed this into a 75-25, and how much I would undercut spending and what the spending would be cut on. And then the other thing is, like, the 75-25 split is the recipe for burnout. And Tiffany can tell you, as the head of our program, if I put that much money into program and didn't put more than 25% into the stuff that is the surround sound of program, I'm fairly sure her staff would be gone in 6 months.
The screen that you see me on right now would be black. I
Yes.
would not be functioning.
Yes. So this is also the root ultimately of the burnout recipe too. So Tiffany, can you make sure that we as a follow-up do a sort of side by side?
Yeah, because I think what I'm trying to wrap my head around, like I'm still very new to this, and I had a call earlier today with my board chair to help me understand how to think about budgeting overhead, actually.
Hmm.
Um, especially when it comes to my time.
Yep.
Um, and I think what I'm just trying to understand is like this model still has to fit within the IRS like statement of
Yep.
functional expense reporting, which you're
Correct.
kind of just saying like a little bit, we're not doing this, like this kind of doesn't matter. We're just reporting it. And the budgeting side of it is that you're allowing yourself to not worry about being really strictly 25/75 and
Correct.
is that right?
Yeah. So as I say, like I can literally send you our live statement of functional expense because I just signed off on it this morning. We are just at the tail end of our audit field work. Um and it is like, no, we are lower than 75%. We're not grossly lower. We're not like 55%, but we're enough lower that like yes, we pay everybody a thriving wage, including our folks who don't work in program. Um,
Mhm.
like we don't pay lower than $92,000 a year because for our full-time employees, because that is from a living wage calculator perspective what it takes for somebody to have one job and live um, in a sustainable way in this country. Um, so that's, we've made those decisions to live values aligned. Um, so, and when in terms of like, we don't budget for overhead. And I think that's the other thing to really get like, we don't have overhead costs. We have strategic, critical support costs. So it's like when you look at the statement of functional expense for my costs, I am 30% shared program. I am 20% core mission support on the finance HR board and 20% core mission support fundraising. So that's how like the cost directly associated with me, and that's my all-in cost. That's my from the computer on my desk to the um, my actual salary. So how we split the cost for Tiffany's computer and my computer are different because we have different functions in the organization. Where if you think of an overhead model, it's like all the tech, like all the computers are overhead, and they're not.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so like I don't actually think that way. So maybe that's where I'm trying
Most of
to.
us don't.
Most of us
And
don't.
that's
Yeah.
why I'm talking about it needing to be that shift in how you
Yep.
think about the work before you shift how you talk about the work.
Yep.
Because if you're ever thinking about it as overhead, then we're still missing the all in cost part.
Yeah.
Because the all in cost for me to be able to do my work includes having a computer, includes me having insurance, includes me having time to recruit people. All of those things are required for me to be able to do my job as managing director of program. And then there are some shared costs that are not directly related to my ability to do my job that are a little bit different. But everything that feeds into my ability to do my job is captured in how the budget reflects my presence.
Yep. So it's not that we're saying F you to our 990s and our functional expenses. We're saying, like, fundamentally think about what it takes for you to sit in your seat. And that is your all-in cost. It's not just your salary and pennies. Um, and Amy, which numbers does my breakdown as an ED?
Yeah, because you gave 70%, I think, not 100.
Because it's 4 o'clock. I am a long way from my caffeine friends. I will fully admit it. So I spend 50%. That's where I messed up. I am 50% core mission support fundraising. I am 30% shared program and 20% core mission support finance HR board. So we will do an example so that we can put that in our convergence, and highly recommend reading the blog from Propel Nonprofits that gives you sort of the voiceover of why we do this. But it is really rethinking, like, we do not have overhead, people. It is all in costing. Um, so, and from a fundraising lens, that is where you have to make this right, or else you will never resource fundraising enough. Yes. Um, there are, if you've ever, he is sort of a, like, love him or hate him figure in the nonprofit sector, but Dan Pallotta, like, did a book, did TED Talks about this concept of that, you actually have to invest in resourcing yourself. Um, and that the system is broken in terms of GAAP accounting principles, in terms of our statement of functional expenses, all of the IRS, like we talked about that, yes, his delivery, very slick. I grew up in the AIDS walk world as a very young fundraiser, so he was a big presence there. So yes, slick is a good word for it. But this is all part of that nonprofit industrial complex that we as executive directors have to be aware of, the outside forces that are forcing us into poor strategic decisions when it comes to resourcing our fundraising.
And so, sorry, can I ask one more follow-up
Yeah,
question? This
no, go
might go
ahead.
back to Nirali's actual question. I might be repeating it, but so when you're, say you're able to articulate, not having overhead costs in the way that you structure your budget, but when you're submitting like the paperwork for a grant and there's a empty space for overhead line item, like how do you just like not fill that out? Or like is that the dialogue back and forth with the funder who's like, this is our template in Excel, you fill it out
Yep.
according to this.
Yeah, so if anybody ever asks what our overhead is, I actually say we don't recognize an overhead cost. I can tell you what is a direct cost versus an indirect cost in terms of the work I'm going to be doing specifically for your work. Like, I can tell you this many hours of Tiffany's salary is this, but Tiffany's whole cost as an employee at Progressive Multiplier for, the 10% of her world you are going to eat up is this. How do you want me to put that in your template? So I put it back on them, is typically how I've done that, is like, this is how we do it. And funder, you have also said repeatedly you don't want to increase the burden on your grantees, and like remind all those talking points of trust-based philanthropy, and we're trying not to make it harder, and this, that, and the other. Is that, like, this is that in action, you know? So, and again, it is really hard to do this when it's risk. It is, especially as an ED, because, like, I feel all 9 of the salaries I am responsible for every minute of every day. That's what keeps me up at night, is like the human beings who rely on me for paying their bills and health insurance, rely on me not to screw up as an ED. That's real. And so that's where leaning into, yes, Amy, 100%. Those are the like, that's the gray hair, that's the dread, because we carry that so hard. And so lean into folks like Progressive Multiplier, like New Left Accelerator, any of those folks. And you make a really good point of, are you talking to the wrong funders? Because that, like, we have 2 funders that we will not work with because they are just not, um we do not want to ethically be in the same pot with them because of the way they've treated us as a grantee. Um, and but that is not a choice I could make 5 years ago. Now that we are a little more financially stable, I could say, like, hey, you treat us like crap. I am not going to apply for renewal, because I can't be okay with the way you're doing business. Um, but that is an incredible place of privilege to be able to say that. And it's not like we're a $4 million organization. We've lived pretty lean. But yeah, that it is definitely if you have funders that aren't willing to be real partners, then it is definitely a call to expand who you're looking at as funders. For sure. All right. Any other questions on this before we um, wrap up on growing and aligning our forces? This is a great conversation. I'll skip this one since we already talked about everything. Um, I want to, before we get into the raise the money to pay for it part of our world, to talk about the questions that were sent in that are tied to this, how do we grow and align our forces? So one of the questions, what were various compensation strategies and objective milestones for full and part-time development directors? And the other was the ratio to allocate fundraising out of the org budget. So compensation strategies and objective milestones. I, when somebody is any sort of employee, they whether it's full-time or part-time, um, it is, I don't think ethical to do the sort of percentage of what you raise, anything like that. That just, I don't like that is one thing when you are in sales, and fundraising is not sales. And Tiffany, feel free to jump in here. Um, so from a compensation strategy standpoint, we don't treat our fundraisers typically any different than our, or we don't treat them any different than any of our other positions. So um, in order to be equitable, we title all of our positions and we say here is, regardless of what department you are in, is what's expected of your position as a managing director or a senior director or a director, and here is the compensation range, and here are the performance expectations tied to moving up and down within that range. So that way and that's part of that equal footing that we need to do to put program and fundraising on equal footing. If you treat your fundraisers differently, then they're different, right? So everybody on the team needs to have the same sort of compensation structure. Objective milestones are different in my mind. So our fundraising staff is responsible for, they need by the start of the fiscal year to have a pipeline that is 4 times the size of the budget that we need to have. And that's a fairly standard ratio. Because when you blend all of the revenue generation tactics together, you usually get about 25% of the money you ask for. And that is a very gross simplification, but you got to start your math somewhere. So if we need $100,000 in our budget, they need to have $400,000 of asks in their plan. So our milestones are things like that. We also track not a milestone, not from a success metric, but knowing based on the kind of revenue generation that you're doing, how long that money should take to come to fruition. So like it may take 18 to 24 months to get a new funder from cold to a funded, and making sure that they are moving along a pipeline. Or if we are launching an individual giving program, we'll do milestones of, like we want the tech set up by this, the prospecting done by this, almost looking at it like a project plan. um, Tiffany, any thoughts here?
Yeah, I'm gonna go back like 45 seconds in something that you said
Yeah, go ahead, hon.
when you were talking about sort of setting things up equitably so that the folks in development are compensated in it is like consonant with folks in program or any other part of the business. I want to be clear that what Bethany's not saying is that the folks in dev are indexed against the folks in another part of the organization. We're still paying fundraisers like fundraisers and program people like program people according to what like we understand the market to be and as we've calculated a living, thriving wage, et cetera. So everybody's not starting at exactly the same point, but what we look at in terms of capacity, skills, abilities, growth areas, et cetera, help us determine where in our scale of compensation someone falls and like where we can
Yep.
scaffold them to be over time based on what they need to learn and what the organization needs.
Yeah, and there are some great salary benchmarks out there. So sort of what program folks at different levels, what fundraising folks at different levels um, are commanding. So we can definitely put the links to those that we've used if that's helpful. So I'm not sure who turned in this question, but talk to me. Did I answer it? Or are there any additional questions?
Um, I have like a related question to that with
Sure,
regard
go
to
ahead.
a development director, a fundraising professional. So my organization doesn't currently have one.
Mm-hmm.
And I am, thinking about what that might look like for next year's budget and whether we can, how to think about that role. If we can afford one, I want one, but thinking about it with the board and what that position might look like for an organization that doesn't have anyone
Mm-hmm.
fully like fully directed towards fundraising. Could you talk a little bit about what might be some of the skill sets you would look for? Like, I don't know what title I would give the person,
Sure.
but
Yep. Um, so where does your revenue come in now? How do you make your money? All grants?
we have a combination of
Okay.
grants and contracts.
Grants and contracts. Um, and have you maxed out what you can make in grants and contracts? Or is there more money there to be had for you?
No, I believe there's more money there to be had. It's a matter of expanding our um expanding our relationship base and what
Yep.
we're able to, who we're able to speak with. So, in our particular case, we're not yet necessarily thinking about individual one-on-one giving per se.
Yep.
I don't think that would be our next step yet.
Okay. So where I would hire would be someone who is sort of mid-level, so not a super senior person, but somebody who's maybe in that 7 to 10 year range, um, who has done institutional giving before and crafting their job to be taking off of your plate like what we talked about previously, like the prospecting, the stewardship communication, the really building the engine of a bigger institutional giving and contract income program. You want to make sure you don't hire too junior, because it's if you don't have anyone with if you don't have a more senior fundraiser on staff, hiring too junior is a real disservice to a younger staff person or a less experienced staff person because there's no one there to mentor them. So you need someone who is, can work fairly independently on this kind of work they've already done before, and who also is still growing in their career and would take on a challenge of like, in a couple of years when you're ready to start an individual giving program or a fee for service program or something else, could do the research and that could be a professional growth area for them. So that is what I would look for to hire. And if you shoot us an email, we've got lots of job descriptions that you could pull from for that. Um, as well as the salary benchmarks based on where you are in the country and what level you want to hire at. Tiffany, does that sound right to you?
Yeah,
You went back on mute, my friend.
trigger finger. I think the one thing I would add, which is probably obvious, but sometimes it helps to make the implicit explicit, is that in the work that you are talking about here in Nirali, a good like project management capacity here, I think is also really important, because we're really talking about setting your feet in directions that you haven't, like places you haven't gone yet. And so project management, I think, will be really important there as a skill.
Yeah, that's a great call out, Tiffany. Any other compensation or milestone questions when it comes to how to set your development director or part-time person up for success? Yeah, all right. So the other question in this grow and align your forces category, the one that we had left unanswered, was the what's a reasonable ratio to allocate fundraising out of the org budget? Obviously, we talked about that in the previous slide in terms of evolving to a more all-in cost and talking about like if the size of the program is this big, here is the slice of the pie that that program actually takes of all of our work. The other thing that I would be cognizant of is that all types of fundraising have a very different return on investment. So if you are talking about event fundraising, you usually raise like 50 cents on the dollar raised. If you're talking about like institutional fundraising, the return is much, much higher. So that's the other thing to really think about when you're talking about um, your revenue and expense budget when it comes to fundraising is the type of fundraising really matters. The best example I can give is I used to do strictly digital fundraising for very large environmental nonprofits. So I had a client and they would spend money on digital advertising to bring in new donors. And, you know, we would spend money to bring in leads for their major giving program. The cost to bring in a lead through digital advertising for major giving was well over $1,000 a lead. But their average major gift was 25,000. So the mathed, right? It was fine to have really expensive leads because they were really big donors. So they were still incredibly net positive in the investment it took to bring them in the door. Now, if you are paying $1,000 a lead and their average lifetime value is like $67, not so much. The math doesn't math there. So all just be aware of your return on investment for the kind of fundraising that you're doing there. Any other questions around this sort of ratio of how do you start thinking about what do you allocate for fundraising? Because it really does start with your programmatic costs. We good? We ready to put growing and aligning our forces behind us? All right. So just a quick gut check. We've talked about a couple of tools that would be helpful in terms of the, the budgeting argument at 75-25 versus all-in costing. Is there anything else that would be helpful for us to add to our resource library that we can send out to you in this vein of how you evolve your fundraising staff or building, this ethos of fundraising across the whole organization? A template fundraising plan. We have one of those in our convergence. We actually have a couple, I think. So yeah, we can definitely shoot Tiffany if I'm sure you're already looking. So we have we did a training series for OSI Baltimore when they shut down for all of their organizations, where we did a full sort of 101 fundraising series of videos, including how do you build your fundraising plan that came with toolkits. So those are on our website. So Tiffany will put those links in the chat and job descriptions. We can definitely send those out, Amy, specifically for different kinds of development staff. You got it. Okay. Tiffany, just as a thought, I do think that that's a I don't know if we want to build a toolkit or just a section within the convergence that has all of the has like an aggregate like rev gen staffing descriptions, because we certainly have them all, but I don't know that we've published them. And the salary benchmarks, yes, I can send those out, what we use here at Progressive Multiplier. That is easy. Okay. So let us get into the raise the money to pay for it piece of our jobs. So when we talk about how do we raise the money to pay for it, we've talked about that understanding fundraising is your job because your title alone positions you to make that ask in a visionary way, the way no one else on your staff can. So if you're an ED, you are a fundraiser. And there is no two ways about it. At least 25% of your staff time needs to go to fundraising. Um, and I want to include getting conversant in fundraising. So, how many of you are new to fundraising or newer to fundraising? So, a good number on this small call. So fundraising is like any other discipline. There's a learning curve, and you have to like attack it just like you would any other course of study. And I think that in talking to my fellow fundraisers, yeah, not new to writing grants, but new to all other types. So we hear that a lot. Um, that most fundraisers' biggest complaint about their ED is that they have no idea what fundraising is. We hear that again and again and again. And it is really hard to be somebody's supervisor when you don't know or understand what they do. So outside of just your role in fundraising, actually getting conversant in fundraising as a field is really important. So we have lots of training. So the screenshot you see here are the tags for all of the fundraising trainings we have. For free on our website. There are over 200 of them. And we've got based on if you know, we want to start a membership program, or we want to start an individual giving program, or if it's like, I need to basic like 101, where do I start? If looking through this yourself is not your jam and you want to email us and say, here's my background, tell me what I need to know as an executive director when it comes to fundraising, and we are happy to curate a take these classes and download these templates for you based on your background. So also happy with Resilience Initiative. If you need some like executive director fundraising boot camp, that is some of what your strategic assistance hours can be used for, your coaching hours. If you want to use hours with Progressive Multiplier, we are happy to ED boot camp for fundraising. That is not a problem. So lots of materials out there, and as I say, happy to curate a capsule collection for you based on your background and what you're getting into. Would that be helpful for folks in term that are newer to fundraising? Okay. The other big thing that is important and we talked about is that role clarity with your development staff. What are you going to do versus what are they going to do? Which is hard to have if you're not conversant in fundraising. So typically, remember to lean into the positional power you have, and that's not a bad thing. Positionality is not a bad thing. And when it comes to fundraising, it is your job to cast the vision and have the long arc strategy and be able to paint the picture and sort of reflect the values. Like any of Tiffany's staff can talk about the in the weeds programmatic work that we do. None of them can sit there and say, here's why we pay our folks the way we pay our folks, or here's um, where we want progressive multiplier to be in 5 years and why. So it really is your job to be able to tell that kind of story. We talked when we talked about the inspire part of our jobs, that is where the role clarity is that staying in that inspire spot and making sure that your dev staff, that you are leaning into them as subject matter experts if you are lucky enough to have development staff, or if you're in a place where you are just getting ready to hire, things like that. Think about, like Nirali, when you think about hiring that mid-level person, that they are going to do like prospecting and funder stewardship communication planning, and probably some tech database management, and making sure your pipelines are clean and all of that. Whereas it's going to be your job to actually have the deep conversations with the funders, to bring your new development staffer along in teaching them how to have support those conversations with really great, more weedy case studies about the work that you do, things like that. And we talked about setting fundraising goals that are actually in alignment with your vision and reality. This is the number 2 complaint from fundraisers about their EDs. It's they don't know what I do, they don't get it, and their fundraising goal is a fairy tale. So you have to make sure that when you give your fundraiser a fundraising goal, that it isn't based on like not reality. So
Vibes. It can't be
it can't
vibes.
be vibes. It can't be the board going, you need to be this big. Because remember, like, you need to have like line of sight on a 4 times as big as you need to land pipeline of revenue. That you don't build that overnight. And if you haven't started building that, you can't say, we're going to double in size in this fiscal year. That's the science part of fundraising. There is a huge math component, and the models are really like just straight linear. Here's what we've got line of sight on. Here's what we need to build. Here's much time we need to build it. So if you can't understand the like how you're going to get step to step to that fundraising goal, please do not hand your fundraiser a fictitious goal because your board said to, or anything like that. As a career fundraiser who is now an ED, this is my biggest complaint, both from my clients as well as people I've worked for, is that, that's delightful that you want to raise $10 million. I can maybe raise you 2 because I don't have that special magic fairy dust. Um, so I beg of you, on behalf of all fundraisers, please make sure your goals are realistic. If a class on realistic goal setting and how you get there would be helpful, we're actually talking to Resilience Initiative right now. They're very interested in doing more ED sort of seminars like this. So looking for other topics. So if the goal setting is a struggle point, we can definitely do that. We can also build a tool for it. Any questions on that? I know we went over that very early on. Um,
I just want to add,
Go ahead.
Bethany has told you that we've got a whole bunch of pieces here for you on this screen and in our repository. I just want to add the additional note that this is all designed with progressive work in mind. So this is how we differ from going out and capturing some consultant to tell you how to do all these things, is that this is like based in the movement and what we've learned and what we've delivered for progressive RevGen specifically.
Thanks, Tiffany. And the reason we make that delineation is that most mainstream fundraising tools are built assuming that you are offering an individual donor the option to help or support or give hope to somebody who needs something. Like, you are curing a disease, you are saving a puppy, you are doing those things. All noble work, all stuff I have done my whole career. Progressive work is different in that you are functionally asking somebody to support shifting power to communities that are not centered in this country. And so it is a different kind of fundraising. It's a different ask. You have to be more creative. It doesn't align with how we've trained our individual donors in this country. So these are resources that are specific to that work. Anybody can use them, but progressive organizations will find a specific love for them. Okay. So the questions that came in around the how do you raise the money to pay for it was really understanding the difference between types of gifts. Um, so most of us start with the institutional gifts, and those are grant people, or those are institutions who make grants to us, and they are either in a restricted fashion or in a general operating fashion. So for example, like the Ford Foundation gives us a grant for our general operating funds. That means I can use it for anything and it is only restricted by time. So I have 12 months to use the grant. Versus Weebolt Foundation, which is a small family foundation out of Chicago, gives us a grant to in a very restricted way, where of their $40,000, 10,000 of that gets granted back out to their grantees, and we work with two specific grantees on projects. So that's a more restricted programmatic grant versus a general operating grant. Within those institutional gifts, you can have your public charities, like Ms. Foundation is a public charity versus a private foundation, a family foundation. And those are all really just sort of different types of governance structures and where the money has come from to seed the foundation endowment. Um, it's a good idea to have different kinds of institutions within your institutional fundraising portfolio, because just like your overall revenue portfolio, the more diversity in type of revenue you can bake in, the better. So even diversity within that one vertical of institutional gifts can help you be more resilient, because like we see trends like sometimes family foundations are affected by a policy that public foundations are not. So we'll see family foundations pull back and public foundations not pull back. So that's where that diversity comes in. The next sort of big sector of gifts that we look at from a philanthropic gift standpoint are individual giving. And these are, just as the name sounds, gifts that come from people. There is a myriad of types of individual gifts. So the first slice we take is usually small dollar, mid-level, major, and planned. Those are the four types of individual gifts. Um, and every organization defines those dollar points differently. So small dollar is typically like your under $100 a year donor. Mid-level can be, 500. Major could be, 2,500. Planned is when someone gives to you through their will or estate. So those are really the four types of individual gifts. There are a lot of different giving mechanisms that lead to those gifts. So that's where you get like somebody giving a major gift through a donor advised fund, or someone giving a small dollar gift at a house party, or somebody giving a small dollar gift as a sustaining donor where they're paying monthly. So that is, and we have many, many classes on different types of individual giving, how to acquire donors. We have an entire class on planned giving. So if you have specific questions about types of individual giving, um, or how to set what's a major donor for your organization versus a mid-level gift, let us know. We're happy to point you in the right direction. Other types of gifts that we see are gifts in kind, whereas somebody's not giving you cash, they're giving you a service or a physical good. Or we also see stock gifts, where people are, This can be an individual or an institutional gift where they are actually paying you in stock that you then either choose to keep as an asset or you can liquidate. So I have one funder that gives us $350,000 a year in stock. It is the most stressful day of my year because they give it on and they say, here is the value of the stock when it hits our brokerage account. And I have to liquidate it fast enough so that that actually turns into that amount of cash. So that's always an exciting day. Yes, that is the only thing we have a brokerage account for. um, I'm not sure who asked this question, but are there any other questions specifically about sort of like what types of gifts are out there for us to go after? I know that's a lot of me talking at you, but
Bethany, did you mention real property? I can't recall.
I didn't. I said gifts in kind, but I did not get into real property.
That's another one.
Go for it, my friend.
So depending on the kind of work that you do and the kind of donors that are in your milieu, you might find some people who say, "Hey, I've got a building I want to donate. Hey, when I die, you can have my house." Folks come up with all different kinds of interesting ideas about things that they own, that like real estate that they would like to donate for whatever reason. Um, a good gift acceptance policy will save you from accidentally acquiring a piece of land that is inaccessible to anybody except by helicopter that you can't use for anything good. We also have some stuff on how to develop a gift acceptance policy in our conversions, but they happen sometimes. It often happens at institutions of higher learning and places that are conserving the environment, right? People say, got this beautiful lakefront property, I want it to be uh, conserved for all time. And hopefully the organization they give it to can do that. It's ideal if the organization knows before the person passes away.
Yes.
Um, so uh, those are the kinds of things that you might find yourself bumping up against. And a good gift acceptance policy will help you figure out what to do when a donor suggests something that you haven't seen before.
Yes. We talked about the brokerage account. We also have like, I'm going to make this gift in crypto. So you have to decide, are you going to accept gifts in crypto? And if so, how are you going to keep or liquidate your crypto? Um, which is sort of the same, will you accept stock gifts? Um, so gift acceptance policy, critical. Your board needs to look at it every year and say, yep, we're still on board with this. We just did that at our annual meeting. Happy to send you our gift acceptance policy. And we do have a training on how do you do that. Info on DAFs. Oh, the DAFs. I can think of nothing except for the onset of digital fundraising that has upended fundraising more than DAFs. So donor advised funds. Does anybody need like a quick 101 on donor advised funds? Or are we up on the DAF? So Tiffany, could you post the DAF training in the
Yes.
in the chat? So the point of entry is you have two options. So, and you should use them both. So when you are storing a donor that is likely of the capacity that they would be giving to a donor advised fund, um, because it is a tax deduction mechanism, they're moving money to their donor advised fund for the tax benefits. But it doesn't mean that it necessarily is reaching the nonprofit in that same tax year. So if you have wealthy donors who are likely to be taking above the standard deduction, they are likely to have a DAF. When you are stewarding them, reminding them they can give a gift through their DAF is part of your stewardship conversation. Also, making sure that all of the big donor advised funds have really succinct information on your offerings, like why should somebody support you? How can they give to you through the DAF? All the things is the other point of entry. Obviously, start with who you have. It is always cheaper to convert, cheaper in time to convert who you have than try to acquire new. And then have someone put together for you, because this is not the highest use of an ED's time, um, who are the donor advisors that you can get a hold of. So this can be like getting a point of contact in some of the donor networks, like the Solidaires and things like that, or it can be going directly to like Fidelity staff and things like that. So those are sort of the two ways to go about that. Nirali, does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you. I
Sure.
just learned
Um,
of DAFs like 2 months ago, so.
oh, DAFs. Every once in a while, I will get a DAF check. And the other thing about DAFs is that they are not required, donors are not required to disclose to you who they are. So like I'll get a check from Fidelity and be like, great, thanks. Who the hell are you? Um, so it's frustrating. And for those of you who have fundraised in like, back in the day when we made money through direct mail, you used to have like a white mail category because it was just like white noise. It just came in and you didn't know from what appeal you had made. It was just a check. So sometimes we get DAF gifts like that, and that just is. Because all of the DAF advisors are using like Charity Navigator and those kind of databases to find 501(c)(3)s.
Can I also add something
Yeah,
to the
go ahead,
like
Gemma.
role of a DAF, at least increasingly now in the reproductive health space, is that it adds a nice anonymity shield for individual donors who
Yep,
may be supporting organizations that, there's like there's like a privacy level to it. And I think it reduces the risk of the donor being affiliated or named, especially if it's a large
you got it.
gift on the 990. So there's like the negative to it, but there's also like a huge positive for helping like donors understand the value add of that if they are
Yep,
supporting something that is, they may not want their name affiliated, but they might want to like be a little bit
yep.
more radical in the way that they fund. So
100%. That's a great call out. In that when you're having those conversations about DAF giving with your donors, um, and if you are in an area that's under particular attack, um, we talked about last Friday, that is definitely something to mention to your donors. Is DAF giving is a great way to continue to support you and lower their own risk. I can't believe I just had to say that on a fundraising training. I'm gonna need to take a beat on that one. Ugh.
but
Um,
it's true.
so true. So true. Um, okay. I want to make sure I didn't miss anything. Trajectory. I
I
mean, go ahead.
Yeah, I can explain this question a little bit. Basically, I'm new and
Hmm.
there's like, as you just stated, there's so many different types of giving. And I, like most of us on this call, are not with a huge team
Yep.
to be like, here are major gifts, right? Like,
Yep.
and so just thinking about where to focus our time, I've seen in a different fundraising course kind of like a natural or like build with foundations, grow with individual giving, steady state at like recurring monthly.
Hmm.
And so I'm just curious if you subscribe to that or if you think differently, since that's kind of the opposite of diversifying in a lot of ways, but maybe the
Yeah.
reality for our capacity.
No, it's a great question. And I don't disagree with the trajectory. I think the timeline that we used to have on that trajectory is totally different than when that became sort of the standard. Like, if you read the Susan Kenny book around nonprofit life cycles, in each of the sort of growth stages of a nonprofit, she details like this is typically the kind of revenue that goes with this. I don't think that model is as sacrosanct as it used to be. So like you start with what you've already got, you know? So, and for some of our grantees, that was not foundation money. That was like they were born of, we have one group that started during the pandemic and they advocate for like long COVID advocacy and support and things like that, strictly grassroots funded. Um, so actually blowing that out very quickly to monthly donors to get a more sustaining membership model going and things like that, that was the right place to start for them. But typically, most of the groups that we work with have started with institutional fundraising. They were seeded as a, you know, a fiscally sponsored project or something like that. So my first advice is always start where you already have traction and make sure that you have maxed out that line of revenue, and that you can retain it. So that's always like step number one. And then step number two is what makes the most sense based on the programs you are doing. So, and this is where the diversification comes in because we rarely start with individual giving with our grantees because most of them are frontline power building groups. So we're actually looking more at membership and C4 membership, and a lot of times fee for service because they're already doing programmatic work that can be monetized that they're giving away for free, um, or way underselling, things like that. If you have an asset like a building and you actually can leverage debt, that also gets into the diversification. So I think that for me, those are the two tried and true rules to the trajectory. Tiffany, would love your perspective on that as well.
Yeah, I think it really sorry, I've gotten like one ping happening over here. My brain just wandered. I think you've nailed everything down, Bethany. I think the key thing is to understand sort of like what your growth trajectory is and how stepwise you get there in terms of like which revenue streams are the most effective to get you where you need to go. Um, am I on the same topic, Bethany?
Yeah, you're fine.
Okay,
And
good. Sorry. I was
typically,
looking for that daft thing for y'all and I missed the last couple sentences that Bethany said.
and remember that like usually one source of your revenue is still going to make up 50% of your revenue. Um, you know, the perfectly balanced, like we don't do anything that brings in more than 20% of our revenue. Like I would love to get there someday. And we just don't have enough tools at our disposal yet, I think, to get there. Um, as smaller organizations. So um, I really think it's like, how do you diversify 50% of your portfolio from your primary revenue source? I think that that's really the other trajectory goal. So I'll add that as a third sort of rule to live by.
I think that's a really important point, Bethany, when you talked about sort of like understanding that this is one section of your revenue and like could you introduce diversity in there, right? Can you find different kinds of foundations that are funding your work that different rules apply or different things are happening with them? And same thing in the individual giving side, right? Like you might only be able to focus on major gifts because you don't have the tech yet to like really build into a grassroots campaign structure. But you do have some founding members who got money and know people with money. There's no point in trying to build out an entire grassroots online fundraising schema at the very beginning if it's going to distract you from raising money from these people that are willing to give you $50,000 every time you ask. You get that money in the bucket and then you figure out, okay, now how do we diversify the individual giving stream? And whether that is, finding more donors, asking them to introduce you to donors that are like more mid-level even donors, which some people will say, well, I could invite these people to my house party, but not all of them can give the size gifts I give. Okay, let's build out the middle giving structure.
Mhm.
That's fine. Um, but to ignore the fact that there's a pool over here because you feel like you have to diversify in this direction is not a great use of your time
Right.
and energy.
That's a great point. Thank you. Any other questions there on how to know what kind of revenue to go first? The more we talk about this, the more I'm like, we could make this like a 10 class series easily. All right. So that is what we have for y'all today, with 10 minutes to spare. As I mentioned, Resilience Initiative has asked us to put together some thoughts about what other ED trainings would be helpful. So whether it's in the chat or shouting it out now or emailing us, we really want to make sure that we build this out in a way that is helpful. So I don't know if it is it that more skills oriented training, like a how do you understand, how do you get conversant in fundraising so that you're a good ED partner to your development director? Because conversant in fundraising is more than a 3-session class. So like, how could we make that palatable to your schedules and your capacity? That sort of thing. So anybody want to riff on what would be helpful or anything that they've found particularly value in these that we could emulate?
I appreciate your willingness to share all of the resources that you have available. I look forward to finding time to look through them. I think as I've been in these trainings, one thing that stands out to me is like the relationship between planning your fundraising and your financial planning and projections, right? And so like particularly if we're in tumultuous financial times, we're thinking about both things, but sometimes
Yep.
we have to fundraise, and it's like, may not be in the most strategic manner. But
Yep.
You spoke today of like how does thinking about the budget and how fundraising fits into it. So like it feels like there's something there where we're linking the two components.
Okay. Yeah, I definitely think that, maybe actually doing a work session of starting with the programmatic work, how do you then look at what a fundraising budget should be? If not to say it's 25%. How do you actually do that in a way that gets it full cost? And how do you deal with those times when I wonder if there's something there between fundraising and cash flow? Management is also what I'm hearing, because that we have to fundraise shouldn't happen if we've got the right cash flow projections, because we are trying to make sure that we've got the cash before like we're never out ahead of our projections. Because you want line of sight on 18 months of what you need to spend so that
You do.
which out the
And you don't
gate
want
is
the
really
government to
hard.
be dropping bombs, here and there.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, I was talking to my board chair this week and she was like, how you doing? And I'm like, I get up and I do my job and all the things. And there's just, it's this very like disconnected, like, I don't know if we're going to be open tomorrow, but darn it, we're going to do the job today because we have the opportunity to. So it's just, yeah, it's, because I feel like we're finally to the point where we are getting really good traction in our staffing and in our programming and everything else like that. And now it's just like this. Okay, are we actually going to be able to grow the way we think we're going to grow? And so it's not, let alone like sort of the much bigger concern about, democracy. So it's very weird. We need we need those to stop. I am in full agreement. For
And
sure.
that's not even about cash flow, right? Like our financial positioning is like we're doing well on our revenue, but we're being haunted by the specter of this other stuff,
Yes.
right? So
any other EDs have money that's like really close to across the finish line and you're like, oh my God, send me the check because you're scared your funder's going to get shut down. That is keeping me up at
that's
night
very
right now.
real.
So again, things I never thought I'd have to talk about on a fundraising training. Um, anything else that we can do? Because I feel like there is definite bigger potential here. Excuse me, KU. My puppy is deciding to eat the plant in the corner of my office here. Thank you, honey. Um, in terms of skills training, what would be the best format for that? If we actually did like a how to get conversant boot camp. What's the most palatable for an ED?
I there's two things that come to mind. I think depending on the group of people, what I found helpful in other trainings is like actually workshopping
Hmm.
your, I don't want to say pitch, but like workshopping how you might start a conversation
Yeah, for sure.
with a funder, and like thinking about how to articulate your work in a much higher level way,
Hmm.
about like focusing on impact and mission instead of like the tactical
Yeah,
pieces. And then so that would be one that I found helpful, is just like navigating some of those conversations.
visionary conversations.
Yeah,
Yeah,
because I think those are the ways that you like actually get people on board.
100%.
Um, and I think from what I like know of people on this call, like we're all really close to the work, so that sometimes can be really hard. Um,
Yeah,
and then the other thing that I would find really helpful is like seeing some of these templates of like fundraising planning. So thinking about how to like be very tactical and strategic about building a plan. I think that's a pretty important skill set that can help everybody sort of like, whether it's going through an example one or having people like be bold enough to put what we have and see what's
yeah,
missing down on a piece of paper, could be really helpful.
yeah, we can definitely do that. Given schedules, um, is that the kind of thing that like we could do like a 3 hour session or a half day session with breaks and do like a true virtual like, you know, uh, um, almost mini conference like that? Because I think the like we can only get so far in 90 minutes with that kind of, if I were going to dig into um like how do you build a fundraising plan? So if we could do like a series of 2 hour, you know, building your fundraising plan over like 6 total hours broken up into 2 hour chunks or something like that, would that be um okay, cool. This is really helpful feedback, y'all. Because we as I say, we've been working with Resilience Initiative for a long time, and we know that we've always done our fundraising Friday calls, which is where a lot of our training fodder comes from, and we've always done the coaching. But we're starting to definitely sense a different need from the executive directors. So thank you for coming to this series and giving us some real data to work with to do some bigger planning for y'all. Anything else that you all want us to know as we go to the drawing boards with our friends at Resilience Initiative? All right. Well, I truly appreciate everyone's yes, chocolate, Pepto, whatever we need, puppy cuddles. I wish I could send everyone on the call a care package. Life has been rough, y'all. Um, because no, chocolate is not overhead ever. Um, so it's th- life as an ED has been it is never easy, but it has been particularly gut-wrenching for me personally over the last um, few months and especially last few weeks. So thank you for giving me some community to lean into. I can't tell you how much I appreciate that. And for being a community of practice that we can learn from one another. And we're really excited to grow this into something bigger. If there is anything that we can do examples, coaching, etc., please, please, please reach out. Tiffany has her email in the chat. You have mine as well. And also SurveyMonkey. Tiffany, can you throw that link for me in the chat? This really helps. We actually Resilience Initiative sends us the feedback so that we can iterate our trainings. So if you like the format, didn't like the format, like you always can be blunt, because we really do take that feedback and make it into how we do future trainings. So thank you. And I wish you as much peace as we can put together in this moment in time, and solidarity for all the great work that everyone is doing. So thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Thank
Take
you.
care all.
Thank you.